Hey everybody, Marcus here. So MGTOW has been referred to by a number of labels, a philosophy, a movement, a group, and even by some as an ideology. Now in the tradition of the Socratic method, before we can answer the whether or not question, we must first ask the tiesti, or what is it question. The reason we do this is that it's hardly suitable for us to know whether or not MGTOW is a philosophy, or whether or not MGTOW is a movement, until we first know what MGTOW is. So this video will try and work through an account of MGTOW. Unlike most accounts though that have been offered before, I won't attempt to assert a definition as much as derive one based on metaphysical argumentation, while trying to keep the number of premises introduced to an absolute minimum. And the ones I will introduce are not in dispute by the MGTOW community. Also, as I go through my arguments and apply terms and ideas not common outside of philosophy, I'll clarify them in an abridged fashion so that you get a good, if not perfect, understanding of the terms. So, let's explore the sentence itself that MGTOW is an acronym for. So MGTOW stands for men going their own way. Now, the most common way this sentence has been interpreted is that there is this group of men out there somewhere who just go about doing their own thing, whatever that may be. And this sentence alone is often cited containing the definition of MGTOW. So let's run with this idea and see where it gets us. First, let's put together a true proposition using this sentence, something we think no one could disagree with. How about the proposition, all men going their own way, go their own way? Well, you might think to yourself that this is obvious, but how is that this is obvious? Let's look at the structure of this sentence. We have the subject, which is men going their own way, and also we have something we are saying about the subject, which is the predicate that states go their own way. Now, this proposition, when looked at as a whole, namely all men going their own way, go their own way, is a judgment that affirms something. So this sentence can be described linguistically as an affirmative subject-predicate judgment. Let's take a look at another example of an affirmative subject-predicate judgment to help us see a little better what's going on. What about the sentence, all bachelors are unmarried? The subject is bachelor, the predicate unmarried, and the sentence as a whole an affirming judgment. Now, what do you see in common between these two sentences? Don't they seem to be saying something obvious? Like by using the word bachelor and unmarried is a little redundant, or men going their own way and go their own way. Does that not also seem obvious and redundant? Well, but do all affirmative subject-predicate judgments work this way? How about the proposition, all bachelors are fat? This proposition you'd probably disagree with and consider it false, but it could be true if in fact every bachelor was fat, but clearly they are not. So why does all bachelors are fat not come across as obviously true, like the sentence all bachelors are unmarried? Well, this is where our friend Immanuel Kant comes in. Kant distinguished between two types of affirmative subject-predicate judgment propositions. The first type, the one you see in all bachelors are unmarried, is called an analytic proposition because its predicate concept, namely unmarried, is contained in its subject concept, namely bachelor. While the second type, the one you see in all bachelors are fat, is called a synthetic proposition because its predicate concept, namely fat, is not contained in the subject concept, namely bachelor. So now we know how the proposition all bachelors are unmarried seems obviously true, while the statement all bachelors are fat does not seem obviously true, though it could be. What we don't know yet is why these propositions come across the way they do. In order to understand that, we need to introduce one more distinction, and that is the difference between an a priori proposition and an a posteriori proposition. Now, I apologize to those that are hearing all these different terms for the first time, but I promise that if you stick with me, it will all make a whole lot of sense why this is necessary. Alright. A priori propositions are propositions whose justification does not rely on experience. Moreover, the proposition can be validated by experience, but is not grounded in experience. Therefore, it is logically necessary. So going back to our all bachelors are unmarried proposition, we know this to be true not because we went out and found all the bachelors out there and made sure they were unmarried. Moreover, we can go out and find some bachelors if we want and check to see if they're unmarried, but that sort of proof is not needed in any way. Therefore, logically, for a bachelor to exist, he necessarily must be unmarried. Alright. A posteriori propositions, on the other hand, are propositions whose justification does require experience. The proposition is validated by and grounded in experience. Therefore, it is logically contingent. So, going back to our all bachelors are fat proposition, we know this is true if and only if we find all the bachelors out there and verify they are fat, or we find one thin bachelor as a counterexample and prove our proposition false. Therefore, the truth of our proposition is contingent on the evidence we find. An easy way to remember these two terms is kind of just to sound them out. So a priori, priori, prior to experience, or with a posteriori, it's posteriori, post experience. So prior to experience or post experience. All right, let's tie all this together. All bachelors are unmarried is an analytic a priori proposition because the subject concept bachelor contains the predicate concept unmarried, and we know this proposition to be true without the need of experience. And all bachelors are fat is a synthetic a posteriori proposition because the subject concept bachelor does not contain the predicate concept fat, and we can only verify if this proposition is true through experience. So now that we're on a roll, let's tackle some MGTOW propositions. From what we said before, all men going their own way go their own way must be an analytic a priori proposition, therefore true and logically necessary. All men going their own way are men is also an analytic a priori proposition, since the predicate concept men is contained in the subject concept men going their own way, and therefore also true and logically necessary. So what we've proven so far is that only men can be MGTOW. Okay, but what about all men going their own way are unmarried? Would this not be a synthetic a posteriori proposition, since unmarried is not contained in the subject concept men going their own way? Would we not then need to go out into the world and find all the men going their own way and verify that they are unmarried to prove the proposition true, or find one married man going his own way to prove the proposition false? Well, in fact, other than the two propositions we named before, namely all men going their own way go their own way and all men going their own way are men, any other proposition put forward in that format would constitute a synthetic a posteriori proposition and would need to be verified through experience. Alright, let's look at this from another perspective. Can a MGTOW be a feminist? Well, I would wager that it is uncontroversial to assert that no, in fact, a MGTOW cannot be a feminist. What about a gamer? Can a man be a gamer and still call themselves MGTOW? Well, I'm pretty sure it is uncontroversial to say that a MGTOW can be MGTOW and also a gamer. So apparently MGTOW can engage in some activities and still be MGTOW, but there are other activities that someone cannot engage in and call themselves MGTOW. But we seem to be unable to determine what a man going his own way can and cannot do just by evaluating the sentence that constitutes the acronym MGTOW, so it would seem. After all, their own way seems to imply decisions freely chosen by a man, and as all decisions anyone ever makes are freely chosen, I mean if free will obtains, then any decision a man makes can constitute their own way. So with this realization, does not the sentence, all men go their own way, and therefore men going their own way, become an a priori analytic proposition with the predicate concept their own way contained in the subject concept men? After all, don't all men have free will? In fact, the sentence men going their own way can be shortened to simply the word men and not lose any meaning. Well, it would seem then that trying to give an account of MGTOW by just looking at the phrase men going their own way really tells us absolutely nothing about MGTOW. So MGTOW as an acronym, or as the expanded sentence men going their own way, must be nothing more than a symbol, a placeholder for meaning, no different than words like judo or elephant or car or computer. Alright, so we find that anyone trying to argue for a definition of MGTOW by simply invoking the words men going their own way has no idea what they're talking about, or at best can only be saying that yes, in fact, they are a man, which for any man to state is merely to state the obvious and uninteresting. Well, I suppose then, in order to be able to answer questions like whether or not a MGTOW can be married, we need to look for an account somewhere other than the words themselves. So, though the inquiry we have undertaken in this video seems to have ended in failure, as in we've not managed to put together a sound account of MGTOW, well, at least we now know what MGTOW is not, and it is not the acronym MGTOW, nor the sentence men going their own way. In future videos, I will take up this challenge again, and hopefully with better results, but for now, I hope that if nothing else, when you hear someone calling themselves MGTOW and trying to justify their life choices as their own way by saying it's right in the label MGTOW, you will realize they're talking nonsense. Thanks for listening, and leave a comment if you found this useful. Cheers!